The last time I listened to a State of the Union address was right after 9/11, I suppose. And our President Bush at that time told us, the State of the Union is strong. Well, maybe it was and maybe it wasn't. I'll let you decide, but I want to share with you a couple of things about what I believe to be the real state of our union. The first thing that we have to remember, if you're measuring the state of a thing, is what's the standard that you're measuring it against. That's a pretty good standard there, I think. That used to represent America. Truth and justice and the American way. That's the kind of standard I think we should aspire to, if you want to look at cartoon figures. I think there's probably another one, though, that applies better today. I used to think this was really true. I used to think that there were people in government that were just dumb. But I'm not sure about that anymore. I don't think they're just Mr. Magoo. I think what we see going on today goes far beyond just being inept and stupid and selfish. I think it is subversive and has a deliberate purpose to bring this nation down. And that's, I think, what we see happening. I think a lot of my countrymen can sense that that's happening. 20 years ago, sitting on the tailgate of a pickup at lunchtime at work, you didn't hear conversations about politics. Today you do. Almost every day. That's what I do. I work in the construction industry. And that's the kind of conversations I hear on the tailgate every day. This is a standard that our founders believed. Number one. This was number one in eminence in the Declaration of Independence.
I have a little girl here whose name is Stacy. She's looking for her mom. Would you please come to the customer service desk? Thank you.
Okay, which one of you is it? Lost your little girl. Okay. A desire for self-government based on natural law, which is the source of our traditional common law in America. And this is James Madison. James Madison is the recognized father of the Constitution. Did I just yell? Or did that just turn up all of a sudden? Okay. This is the standard that our founders used that had the preeminent position in the Declaration of Independence. We have staked the whole future of American civilization upon the capacity of mankind for self-government, upon the capacity of each and all of us to govern ourselves, to control ourselves, to conduct ourselves, to sustain ourselves, according to the Ten Commandments of God. Boy, I wish we could unplug that. This is another standard. This is the Declaration of Independence. It's a national charter. And if you're familiar with how business is organized, they start with a charter. It defines who has the powers, who authorizes them to exist, and it sets forth the mission statement. The national charter for the United States of America is the Declaration of Independence. And within that charter, you'll see in a little bit here, is a sovereign power which was left with the states, which gave the states the authority to nullify bad law that comes from the federal government. Second standard. The third standard would be the Constitution. Again, same kind of concept as in organizing a business. You have a charter that authorizes it, gives the reasons why the business is going to exist, gives the authority for it, and the mission statement. The Constitution is our bylaws. That is the organizing principles for the corporation. It sets forth the way the officers are elected, the powers that the corporation has. And in our federal government, it's explicitly referred to by the founders in the writings and the Federalist Papers and the correspondence between James Madison and Thomas Jefferson and George Washington and John Adams and all of our founders. It sets forth the boundaries that are going to be placed around our federal government, and it gives them specifically enumerated powers which they have to operate under. And if they don't stay within those powers, our rights are no longer secure. Now that's an important thing to remember. And I'll show you where this all's going south on us here pretty quick. But these are the questions that these are the principles that you have to realize that we need to have in place and being followed in order for America to do in the next 200 years what was done in the previous 200 years. Those principles are what built this nation, and if we cannot bring them back, restore them, this nation cannot exist like it has until now. Now we can see that those principles are being abandoned, and we can see the results of it in our national decline. Do we still contend for the first standard, for natural law, what the Declaration calls the laws of nature and nature's God? Well, here are just a few examples, just from the headlines of the day and the things that our culture and our society agonizes over in the public debates. I don't think that natural law is being contended for anymore in the halls of government at all, in the halls of justice, and certainly not in the executive department. And this is a part of the reason why those standards are falling. This is it was typical of me as a teenager. It's typical of every one of you, probably. And it's typical of your kids today. When we're youngsters, we just think we're smarter than the people who brought us along. And for some reason, the second law of thermodynamics applies to that kind of a situation. You know it? One of the most well-researched and documented laws of science says that a system that is left to itself will disintegrate if there's no outside power to hold it together. That's what natural law does in a constitutional republic. It's the rule of law that keeps us from disintegrating and everybody going their own way and being a law unto themselves. So what's all the point of this tampering with natural law, this first principle, this first standard that we have to measure our nation against to see what actually our state is? Our founding fathers believed that God himself was personally responsible for the founding of this nation and our governing documents. And to minimize or destroy our natural and common law system is to stand in open defiance of Almighty God, who is its creator. He's the one that will hold this together if we will follow his ways. And we do have an obligation not to simply find what the problem was and then gripe about it, When I was a young guy, I didn't even find the problem. I just griped about it. And you can hear that in a lot of conversations that you will have with your fellows today. But we have an obligation that goes way beyond that. As Christian Americans, I believe our obligation is to pray for our leaders, our church leaders, but our civil leaders as well. And if they are standing in defiance of the plan that God had put in place, and this is from the lips of our founders who believed that He was the one responsible for this, we have an obligation to pray for them that they will finally get it. And we have an obligation further to pray that if they refuse to get it, that they will lose all of their support and that their plans will be confounded so that we can restore what Abraham Lincoln called the last best hope of mankind. Now that's as far as civil government was going, and he knew that. That's what he meant. Our only hope is in Jesus Christ. But in the realm of civil government, this system that our founders created is the last best hope of mankind. I believe that. And here's the method to the madness. This was from Joseph Stalin. America is like a healthy body, and its resistance is threefold. It's patriotism, it's morality, and it's spirituality. If we can undermine these three areas, America will collapse from within. He was just bold enough to say it out loud. I don't think that was his plan. I think that came from somewhere else. He just put voice to it. Now, we're still talking about the first principle with natural law and how we conduct ourselves in relation to that. These are things that the Lord has taken me through in the last 5 years. He's had me in the book of Proverbs. This is a king writing to his sons who are going to inherit a nation. All right, how do people supposed to act, and what are the consequences for a nation? How do you rule a nation? Listen to this. I went by the field of the slothful, and by the vineyard of the man void of understanding, and lo, it was all grown over with thorns. Nettles had covered the face thereof, and the stone wall was broken down. Sounds like America, if you ask me. Then I saw and considered it well. I looked upon it and received instruction. A little sleep, a little slumber, blah, blah, blah. It all falls down. That's pretty much the church in America today. A little sleep, a little slumber. We'll let somebody else worry about that. The Church of Jesus Christ in America today has a responsibility to rise up and speak their voice, speak their heart, speak truth to power, and take it back. Proverbs 22:28, remove not the ancient landmark which thy fathers have set. When I first read that, I thought, well, that's just talking about boundaries of a state or a county or whatever. Nah, those are boundaries of conduct, folks. And the boundaries of conduct in America has been eroded through actions in very large measure from the judiciary in America, but it all boils down to individual responsibility, doesn't it? It's each and every one of us to conduct ourselves, to sustain ourselves according to the Ten Commandments. Proverbs 28:4-9. These two verses are pretty powerful. They that forsake the law praise the wicked, but such as keep the law contend with them. Are you going to keep the law? If you are, the scriptures say the way to do that is to contend with the wicked. You can't sit on your hands and cover your mouth and let the pastor do it. No, because he's not doing it. He that turns away his ear from hearing the law, even his prayers shall be an abomination. Ouch. Proverbs 18:3, when the wicked come, then comes also contempt, and with ignominy comes reproach. And that's my paraphrase underneath that. That's what that means to me. When the wicked rise in power, and we allow that, they hold the standards of God's law and righteousness in contempt. If the called, if the Christian community dishonors God by failing to defend His standards, they're then viewed as worthless. A reproach is the word that the Scriptures use. Do we contend for standard number 2, the declaration? Is God still the unquestioned sovereign in America? Well, you ask the IRS. No, not so much. Do we still have certain unalienable rights? Do you remember that phrase from the Declaration of Independence? That word certain doesn't mean, willy-nilly or uncertain. It means certain rights, unalienable rights to life, liberty, and property. Well, you can ask the unborn. Do they have a right to life? You can ask your TSA agents at the airport, do you have a right to your liberty to be free from being groped? How about your property? Don't pay your taxes, you'll find out whether you got a right to that or not. Is the federal government focusing and restricting its actions to securing our rights? Ask yourself the question, and I don't think I have to ask you to answer it. You know the answer to that. Or is it becoming destructive of that end? The Declaration tells us that if we have these rights, then we have a duty, and if the government becomes destructive of securing those rights for us, then we have a duty to alter or abolish it. And here's the creed. This is the Declaration of Independence. To my mind, if a man does not hold these in his heart as his own creed, how can he be an American? This is the reason why America was created. To secure these rights that God has given us is the reason this government, this federal government for the United States, was created. That's the reason it exists in the minds of our founders. And if it becomes destructive of that end, then the people have a right to alter or abolish it. And that alter or abolish, that's the tie between those three standards. Natural law, our national charter, the reason that we exist, and our national bylaws, the rules by which this general government has to operate under. To alter or abolish. If the government becomes destructive of that end, we have to alter or abolish. I've said that 4 times now. It's really important that we remember that that is our duty under our founding documents. That is our duty as citizens to make sure that our government secures for us the rights that God gave us. Now, do we contend for standard number 3, the U.S. Constitution? This is in the headlines today. People are beginning to see this standard. I'm not so sure that they see the first 2, natural law and the Declaration and the principles contained there, but they're beginning to see that this thing is being neglected and ignored. The Constitution says we're supposed to have a limited federal government. The Constitution says that limited government has been manifested by giving it specifically enumerated powers. The Constitution says that there's consequences for violating those limits. Remember, we just talked about alter or abolish if the government becomes destructive of the end of securing for us our God-given rights. So, here's a couple of questions that we need to ask in regard to our government behavior and conducting its affairs, whether it's paying attention to these bylaws or not. Where does it say these things? And if that is true, what I just told you, how did we get so much government if it's supposed to be limited, if they've only got a certain amount of powers? And how do we restrain it? Well, that's a good question. There is a constitutional standard for federal reach into the states and the individual citizens. It's in Article 1, and right down there at the bottom one, Section 8. That's where the powers of Congress are outlined in our bylaws. This is the things that they have been given the authority to do as the agent of the states. Now think about this, because this will come into play in the doctrine called nullification. If the federal government is the agent of the states and is supposed to do what the states tell it to do, the states can nullify bad laws that the federal government enacts, because the states have the supremacy. Okay, this is the full text of Article 1, Section 8. Right up here, it says that Congress has the power to lay taxes, duties, imposts, excises, pay the debts, and okay, now, this is where we're going to get on to the root. The Congress shall provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. Okay, that's called the General Welfare Clause, just that very first line up there. That's gotten us into some serious trouble. That's it right there. They're to provide for the common defense and general welfare. This is what James Madison told us consisted of the general welfare. These paragraphs, 2 through 9. Now look at that. Borrow money on the credit, regulate commerce, rule of naturalization, bankruptcies. There's not very much there, really, is there? If that is the general welfare of the United States that the Congress has been delegated the authority to act upon, then why are they acting on so many other things? What are they doing? This is the common defense. Remember that opening line, the General Welfare Clause, it says that they have the power to provide for the common defense and the general welfare. Look at this. These are all things that are very obviously things related to the military. Raise armies, Navy, land and naval forces, militia, organizing, arming, disciplining the militia. Doesn't that look like that's all has to do with common defense? Okay. Well, being as that's the case, let me back up again. Wouldn't it make sense that the rest of the article has to do with the general welfare? It's pretty simple, actually. The bottom of the Article 1, Section 8 talks about the places where the federal government has exclusive legislative jurisdiction. And all of this simply means Washington, D.C., where the seat of government is, and dockyards and arsenals and so forth, that they have bought and paid for and they own. The U.S. government owns. And then this says that they have the authority to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers. So there's 17 paragraphs there that contained the powers of Congress. And then, on top of that, we have the 9th and 10th Amendments, which were ratified by the states as a condition. This is a good number of the states told the Constitutional Convention that they weren't ratifying this Constitution unless you had the Bill of Rights. And this is the 10th Amendment here. This is what you're hearing about today. Some of the states are getting involved in nullifying bad federal law, like our health bill, like the Defense of Marriage Act and so forth, where the federal government's trying to make law for the states outside their jurisdiction. The states are getting tired of that, and they're referring to this. So it mentions right there, powers, not delegated to the United States. Okay. There's a question to ask regarding that general welfare clause. Is it a grant of unlimited congressional power to do anything at once? That's what the courts have been telling us since 1936. There was a case at the Supreme Court where the judges decided that they were going to settle an argument that had been going on for a long time. Until that time, for 150 years, it had been understood by the legislatures of the United States that general welfare meant those 17 powers that were listed in Article 1, Section 8. In 1936, that Supreme Court decision said, nah, what that really means is Congress can do anything it wants and call it the general welfare. Well, that's not what James Madison said, and this is Madison in Federalist Paper number 41. What purpose could the enumeration of those 17 powers possibly, what could it serve if those powers and everything else they could think of were going to be included in it? It's ludicrous. I don't know, but I would think that a responsible senator and U.S. congressman and even president should have looked at that judge and said, you're violating the public rights. The Constitution says that that is a misdemeanor. It's a crime. And you need to be exposed to impeachment proceedings and removal. That would be a responsible thing for a Congress to do. When somebody that high up in the government begins violating the public rights. This is Madison again. On his first U.S. Congress, when they convened, this is what he told them. If Congress can apply money indefinitely to the general welfare and are the sole and supreme judges of the general welfare, they may take the care of religion into their own hands. They may take into their own hands the education of children, establishing in like manner schools throughout the Union. They may undertake the regulation of all roads other than post roads. In short, everything from the highest object of state legislation down to the most minute object of policy would be thrown under the power of Congress. For every object I have mentioned would admit the application of money and might be called, if Congress pleased, provisions for the general welfare. The general welfare clause was created just the way it was written to limit the power of the federal government to tax us. This guy should know. He was responsible for most of the Constitution itself. He should be listened to above Charlie Rangel or Barack Obama or Mr. Magoo. There really is too much government. And that's why. They can tax us for anything they want to now because they call it the general welfare. And they've perverted the original intent. David Barton was right. And Thomas Jefferson was right. If we want to understand the laws, we have to understand them from the thinking of the men that wrote them. Well, James Madison wrote most of this. We need to understand it the way he understands it. Now, there are other issues that we have. I bet everybody in here could come up with one, and they'd all be different. You probably all have your pet peeve about something that the federal government is involved in. And you think to yourself, they can't do that, can they? Well, this is why they do and why they can. It's because they're ignoring the clear meaning of their own powers that were given them by the states. So there's a lot of responsibility that can be spread around, and this is why the Constitution Party has been raised up. Historically, at least where I'm from in Spokane County, the Constitution Party has been the initiator and really the nexus of the educational thrust into our community to provide answers that make sense so that people know how to answer a question, whether it's in their own mind or that somebody has given them. Is that constitutional? I'm surprised at how often I hear that. I had a Kootenai County, it's from Idaho, not even in my state, a Kootenai County deputy sheriff came to me and asked me if it was constitutional, something that their state legislature had just passed, which happened to be at odds with what the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms was telling them. When it's a matter of jurisdiction, when it's a matter of who gets to say what the rules are, the federal government is always going to tell us that they have authority. Well, you need to remember, the federal government is the agent of the states. They always have been. It just happens that in our day, they're not behaving like that. And what we are faced with today is a scene very much like the butler of the house slapping around the owner and being very insolent and insubordinate. Well, the states have the power to nullify and to shape the federal government back up. But I maintain that things exist today at the state level and at the federal level because this is exactly what the major two parties want it to look like. Otherwise, it wouldn't look like this. If we want to remain a free and prosperous people, we have to make sure that our government continues to secure for us the rights that will make us free and prosperous people. If they step out of that role, We are not free and prosperous anymore. And that is what we see today. So I'm enlisting you. I'm asking for your help. Help the Constitution Party to grow. We don't have a left and a right wing as far as a worldview of national governance today with the major two parties. We have Socialist Party A and Socialist Party B. And over here somewhere, we have the people in the Constitution Party who have built a vehicle in the hopes of providing a place for freedom-loving and truth-seeking Americans to get on this ship when the other two go down. This rightfully, for 20 years now, the Constitution Party has existed. There is a home base for the Tea Parties, the people that have become disillusioned. Well, no, I wouldn't say disillusioned. The people who have awakened to what's going on in the country with our national government and the usurpation of authority and power. This vehicle is here. We need to use it as soon as possible. Because as I said, those who have engineered our national decline and failure are not going to be the ones that right the wrongs.